She woke up before the sun, the streets still quiet and cool under the early morning light. Her blanket was little more than a worn-out scarf, barely keeping her warm. She rubbed her eyes and looked around, the familiar sight of cracked sidewalks and empty shops greeting her. She had spent another night on the edge of the city park, curled up against a tree, listening to the occasional distant car hum and the rustle of leaves. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, a dull ache that had become a constant companion, but she had learned to ignore it, at least for a little while, because there were more pressing matters to face every day. Her feet were cold, and the thin soles of her shoes were torn, but she didn't complain. There was no one to hear her, and complaining didn't make her situation better. She stretched, her back aching from sleeping on the hard ground, and stood up, brushing off the dirt from her clothes. The city was waking up slowly, the first buses rumbling past, shopkeepers beginning to lift their shutters, and the smell of bread baking somewhere in the distance making her stomach grumble even more. She knew she had to find something to eat soon. There were a few coins in her pocket, the ones she had managed to gather from the few kind strangers who had thrown her change in the past few days. Not enough to buy much, but maybe a small meal, or at least something to take the edge off her hunger. She began to walk, her steps careful, avoiding puddles from last night's rain. Every corner of the city was familiar to her, every alley and every hidden spot where she could rest for a few minutes. She had learned to move quickly and quietly, to disappear when the police or other officials passed by. Life on the streets was not easy, and there were many dangers she had to navigate. But despite all of it, she carried a quiet determination in her heart. Music was her companion, her escape, and the only thing that made the world feel less harsh. Her small notebook was tucked into the pocket of her jacket, the pages filled with sketches of musical notes and little compositions she had created in her mind. Sometimes she hummed the tunes quietly, careful not to draw attention, imagining herself playing them on a real piano, feeling the keys beneath her fingers. Music had always been her dream, something that lifted her spirit even when everything else felt hopeless. It was the one thing that made her feel alive, even when the city was cold and indifferent. As she walked, she passed familiar faces, other people who lived on the streets, each with their own stories, their own battles. Some nodded in greeting, a small acknowledgement of shared struggle, while others kept to themselves. She didn't have many friends, but she had learned that survival often meant keeping your distance, keeping your guard up. Yet deep down she longed for connection, for someone to see her not just as a hungry girl, but as a person with dreams and talent. By mid-morning, she found herself near a busy street corner, where the sounds of the city were louder and the smell of food was stronger. The aroma of fresh bread, sizzling meat, and coffee filled the air, making her stomach ache even more. She watched people walking past, carrying their bags, chatting with friends, completely unaware of her presence. Some glanced at her, a quick look of pity or curiosity, but most ignored her entirely. She had grown used to being invisible, to existing on the edges of society, where life continued around her, but not often with her. She sat down on a low wall, careful to avoid the mud, and took out the few coins she had. Counting them slowly, she realized it might be enough to buy a small sandwich or a cup of soup. But even that required careful planning. The city was expensive, and her coins would not last long. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the warmth of a meal, the taste of something filling, something that would make her forget the ache in her stomach for a little while. The thought gave her a small spark of hope, a reason to keep moving. After a while, she stood up again, adjusting her jacket against the cool morning air, and continued walking. Her eyes wandered to a small cafe across the street, a place she had noticed before but never entered. Through the window, she could see a piano in the corner, a shiny instrument that seemed almost magical in the morning light. She stopped for a moment, her heart beating faster. Music and food, the two things she needed most, were both here in front of her. But she knew she couldn't just walk in and ask to play. Life had taught her that opportunities didn't come without courage, and courage was something she had to find within herself. She lingered at the edge of the cafe, watching the people inside. Some were reading newspapers, others chatting, laughing over coffee and pastries. The piano sat there waiting, as if inviting her to come closer. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement. What if she tried and failed? What if someone laughed at her, or worse, told her to leave? But the hunger in her stomach and the longing in her heart pushed her forward. She took a deep breath and crossed the street. her small notebook clutched tightly in her hand. Inside, the cafe was warm, the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee stronger than ever. People glanced up as she entered, some with curiosity, some with mild annoyance at the interruption. She moved carefully, trying to appear calm though her heart was racing. The waiter, a tall man with kind eyes, noticed her hesitation. He had seen many people on the streets, but there was something different about her. Something that made him pause. She approached the piano, her hand shaking slightly. The keys gleamed under the soft light, so different from the imagined piano in her mind. She opened her notebook and looked at the notes she had scribbled, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. The waiter came closer and asked softly, "Would you like to play? If you do, we'll make sure you get something to eat." She looked up at him, surprised, unsure if she had heard correctly. Hunger and hope collided in her chest. She nodded slowly, barely able to speak, and moved toward the piano. As she sat down, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering all the nights she had spent imagining this very moment, dreaming of the music she would create. And then slowly she began to play. The first notes were soft, hesitant, but each one carried the weight of her dreams, her struggles, and her hope. The sound filled the cafe, gentle at first, then growing stronger as her confidence built. People inside stopped their conversations, drawn to the music. The room seemed to grow quieter, the usual clatter of cups and chairs fading away. Her fingers moved with surprising skill, bringing the music to life. Every note told a story of hunger and survival, of dreams and determination, of a young girl who refused to let life break her spirit. The waiter watched, his eyes wide with awe, realizing that this was not just a street girl but a talented musician, someone whose gift could touch the hearts of everyone who listened. As the music continued, she felt a strange sense of peace. The cafe, the people, the city outside, all of it faded away, leaving only her and the piano. Her stomach still ached, but the hunger seemed less important in that moment. The joy of creating, of sharing her music, was stronger than anything else. She played on, each note carrying her story, each chord a message to the world that she was here, that she mattered, and that even in the hardest circumstances, beauty could exist. By the time she finished, the room was silent for a moment, as if everyone was holding their breath, and then slowly the applause began. It was gentle at first, then grew louder, filling the cafe with warmth and appreciation. She looked up, surprised and overwhelmed by the response. The waiter smiled, a proud and understanding look in his eyes, and handed her a warm meal. She took it, grateful, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. It wasn't just the food that touched her, but the recognition, the kindness, and the realization that her talent could open doors she had never imagined. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Not just for today, but for the future. She knew the streets would still be there, the struggles still waiting, but she had found something stronger, a purpose, a voice, and a place where she could be seen and heard. And as she took her first bite of the warm meal, she promised herself that she would not let this moment be the end, but the beginning of a new chapter in her life. After the music had stopped and the applause filled the cafe, she sat there stunned and uncertain, her fingers still lightly touching the keys. The warmth of the room, the smell of coffee, and the sound of people talking again felt almost strange to her. She had lived on the streets for so long that normal surroundings felt unfamiliar. And yet, in that moment, there was a small sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. The waiter came over with a plate of warm food and a cup of tea, placing them gently in front of her. The steam rose, carrying a comforting aroma that made her stomach growl once more. She looked at the meal, her hands hovering above it for a moment, almost afraid to touch it, as if she weren't allowed to have something so ordinary, so good. With a quiet nod of thanks, she picked up the fork and started eating. The flavors were simple but rich. Bread that melted in her mouth, vegetables cooked just right, and a warm piece of chicken. Each bite felt like a miracle. For a long time, she had eaten cold scraps or had gone hungry entirely. Now, the food was more than nourishment. It was a small reward for surviving another day, for daring to step into a place that had once seemed impossible for her to enter. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, knowing that each mouthful was a gift she didn't want to waste. As she ate, the waiter stayed nearby, watching her with quiet curiosity. He could tell she wasn't used to this kind of kindness, and he didn't want to rush her or intrude. The other patrons had returned to their conversations, but a few still stole glances, whispering softly among themselves. The way she had played the piano had left a mark, a momentary pause in their busy lives that they couldn't forget. There was something rare and moving about the way she expressed herself through music, a depth of feeling that was hard to describe. Once she had finished, the waiter asked if she would like some water. She nodded, and he poured her a glass, sitting down across from her for the first time. "You play beautifully," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "Have you played the piano before?" She shook her head, a small shy smile appearing on her face. She had practiced in her notebook, on imaginary keys, on old keyboards she sometimes found in back alleys or discarded from schools. But she had never had the chance to sit at a proper piano like this. "I love music," she whispered almost to herself. "It keeps me going." The waiter nodded, understanding more than she could know. A little while later, the cafe manager, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, approached them. She had heard the performance and was curious about the girl who had stopped everyone in their tracks with such raw talent. "That was beautiful," the manager said warmly. "Do you come here often?" She shook her head. "I've never been inside. I don't usually get a chance." Her voice was quiet, but there was a spark of pride in her eyes, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. The manager nodded, her mind turning over possibilities. "You have real talent," she said. "Would you like to play here sometimes? We could find a way to make it work." The girl's heart skipped a beat. The idea of being invited back, not just to play, but to belong somewhere, felt almost unbelievable. She spent the rest of the morning in the cafe, a little awkward, a little unsure of how to act in a place that was so warm and full of people who didn't judge her. She listened to the conversations, the laughter, and the soft clinking of cups and plates. She noticed small details she had never paid attention to before. The way sunlight filtered through the windows, casting patterns on the floor, the way a child laughed at something their parent said, the quiet concentration of someone reading a book. All of it was new yet comforting. She realized that while the streets had been her home, this place offered something she hadn't realized she needed, a sense of normalcy, of being part of the world in a gentle, unforced way. As the day went on, she learned a little more about the cafe and the people who ran it. The manager introduced her to a few of the regulars, people who came daily for their coffee and pastries. Some smiled at her, others nodded in greeting, all of them noticing the quiet dignity she carried despite her rough appearance. She realized that she didn't have to hide in the shadows anymore, that she could exist in a space where people didn't just look at her with pity, but with appreciation for what she could do. The warmth of acceptance was almost overwhelming, and she found herself quietly grateful for every small kindness. Later, the waiter handed her a small notebook and a pencil, encouraging her to write down her compositions. Even if she didn't have a piano to play them on immediately, she took it, careful with her hands and open to a blank page. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of creativity, a desire to put her thoughts into something tangible. She began to write, sketching out melodies, scribbling notes, humming quietly under her breath. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, a reminder that she had more to offer than just survival on the streets. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, the cafe started to fill with more customers. The girl watched quietly, taking in the sounds, the smells, and the little movements of life happening around her. Each person had a story, just as she did, and in a strange way it made her feel less alone. She realized that while she had lived in a world of scarcity and struggle, there were still places where people could connect, where kindness could be found in the most unexpected moments. The music she played, even in the short time she had been there, had already begun to bridge that gap, showing her that talent and heart could open doors she had never dreamed of. By late afternoon, the cafe began to quiet down, and the manager returned to speak with her again. "You have something very special," she said. "If you'd like, we could help you get some lessons or even just a chance to play more often. You don't have to stay outside struggling anymore." The girl felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The idea of being seen, really seen, and helped in a way that mattered was almost too much to believe. She nodded slowly, her heart full of hope and nervous anticipation. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she could imagine a life that was different, a life where her music mattered, and where she didn't have to fight every day just to survive. The day ended with the sun lowering in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. She left the cafe with a small bag of food, a notebook full of new ideas, and a heart that felt lighter than it had in years. As she walked back toward the area where she usually stayed, she thought about everything that had happened, replaying the music, the applause, and the kindness of strangers. She realized that one moment of courage, one small step forward, had the power to change everything. It wasn't the end of her struggles, but it was the start of something new, a beginning she hadn't dared to imagine until now. That night, she found a safe corner under a familiar bridge, unrolled her thin blanket, and sat down to write in her notebook. The city around her was quiet, the distant hum of traffic and occasional footsteps the only sounds. She began to play, using an imaginary keyboard, her fingers moving over the pages as if they were keys. Each note, each melody, carried the hope of the day, the kindness she had received, and the dream she refused to let go of. Hunger and hardship still lingered, but they no longer defined her. She had discovered a spark of possibility, and it burned brighter than any fear or doubt. As sleep began to creep in, she closed her eyes with a quiet smile. Tomorrow, she thought, would bring more challenges, more obstacles, but also more chances to grow, to play, and to be seen. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, her life could change in ways she had only ever dreamed of. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual, the faint glow of sunrise creeping through the city streets. Her blanket was thin and the cold air bit at her skin, but she felt lighter, more alive. The events of the previous day played over in her mind like a dream. The applause, the warmth of the cafe, and the way people had listened to her music. She clutched her notebook close, flipping through the pages she had written and drawn the night before. Each note and sketch a symbol of hope and possibility. Determined to return to the cafe, she walked quickly through the streets, careful to avoid the puddles and scattered trash that littered her usual path. Her stomach grumbled, but she ignored it. Her mind focused on the piano waiting for her. She imagined sitting down and letting her fingers move freely across the keys, creating the melodies she had only been able to hum quietly in the streets. The thought made her chest tighten with excitement and nerves. When she reached the cafe, the door chimed softly as she entered. The warmth hit her instantly, and she felt a wave of comfort. The staff greeted her with smiles, the manager nodding encouragingly. There was a small crowd gathered, a mix of regulars and a few new faces, curious to hear the girl who had played so beautifully the day before. The piano in the corner gleamed, bathed in morning light, and she felt drawn to it as if it were calling her by name. Taking a deep breath, she approached the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cover and positioned herself on the bench. The keys were smooth beneath her fingers, a familiar yet foreign sensation. She opened her notebook, tracing the notes with her eyes, and began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, like a whisper. She could feel the audience watching, waiting, and it made her heart race, but she didn't stop. She let the music flow naturally, allowing the emotions that had been bottled up inside her to spill out through each key. The melody started to build, gentle at first, then growing more confident, more expressive. Her fingers moved with a surprising grace, weaving intricate patterns that told a story of struggle, hope, and resilience. The cafe grew quiet, the usual clatter of cups and conversation fading into silence as every ear turned toward her. She could sense the attention of the crowd, the way their eyes followed her movements, the subtle expressions of awe and wonder on their faces. Her music was no longer just a personal escape. It had become a bridge between her world and theirs. A soft murmur ran through the crowd as the melody deepened, each note carrying a weight of emotion that could not be ignored. She played from the heart, letting her past struggles and present hopes guide her fingers. Memories of cold nights on the streets, the hunger that had been her constant companion, the small moments of kindness she had received. All of it was poured into the music. The room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the story she was telling without words. As she continued, she noticed a few people wiping tears from their eyes. A mother held her child a little closer. A businessman leaned forward in his chair, captivated, and even the waiter who had first invited her to play looked on with wide eyes, clearly moved. The power of the music was undeniable. It transcended age, background, and circumstance. Every note seemed to resonate with something deep within them, touching emotions they hadn't expected to feel. The girl's hands moved faster now, more assured, as she lost herself in the music. She forgot about the hunger, the cold, and even the crowded cafe. There was only the piano, her fingers, and the stories she wanted to share. Each chord and each melody became a conversation, a silent dialogue between her and the listeners. She felt the energy in the room, the unspoken connection, and it fueled her to play even more passionately. Time seemed to stretch, each second filled with music and emotion. Her eyes were closed, and she was unaware of the world outside the piano's reach. She could feel the rhythm of her heart in sync with the notes, a perfect harmony of her spirit in the instrument. The audience was entranced, not by the skill alone, but by the authenticity, the honesty in every sound. It was as if her soul was speaking directly to theirs, conveying a depth of feeling that could not be captured by words. When she finally reached the end of the piece, the last note lingered in the air, a gentle echo that seemed to hold everyone in its wake. There was a moment of absolute silence, as if the cafe itself was holding its breath, reluctant to break the spell. Then slowly, applause erupted, soft at first, then growing louder and more heartfelt. People stood, some with tears still in their eyes, clapping and cheering. The girl opened her eyes, blinking, overwhelmed by the response. The music had worked its magic, and for the first time she felt truly seen. The waiter stepped forward, offering her a warm smile and a plate of fresh food. She accepted it, her hand shaking slightly, her heart still racing. The applause continued as she took a small bite, the flavors richer and more comforting than ever. She felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. How could her small hands, her simple melodies, move so many people? The thought was almost overwhelming, yet it filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known. After a few minutes, the manager approached, her eyes shining with admiration. "You were incredible," she said softly. "We would love to have you play here regularly. You have a gift that touches people in ways that words cannot. Would you consider it?" The girl nodded slowly, her throat tight with emotion. She couldn't believe that her passion, her music, could lead to something like this. She had always dreamed of playing for someone, of sharing her talent beyond the lonely streets, but she had never imagined it could be like this. So immediate, so powerful. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She was offered a small stipend for playing, which she used to buy a few more necessities she had been missing. But more than the money, it was the experience, the recognition, and the encouragement that mattered most. The cafe staff treated her with respect and kindness, and the patrons continued to show appreciation for her music. She found herself smiling more freely than she had in months, even years. The music had not only fed her soul, but it also opened a door to a new chapter of life. That evening she returned to her usual spot under the bridge, but this time it felt different. The city around her was the same, cold, noisy, and indifferent, but she carried with her the warmth of the cafe, the memory of attentive ears, and the joy of creating. She unpacked her notebook and began to play again, using the imaginary piano she had often dreamed of. The melodies were richer now, filled with the confidence of someone who had been heard, someone who had begun to believe in her own worth. As the stars appeared in the night sky, she played until her fingers ached, letting the music carry her thoughts, her dreams, and her fears. She thought about tomorrow, about the chance to return to the cafe and share more of herself. She felt a growing sense of purpose, a feeling that her life could change in ways she had never dared to imagine. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge to possibility, a way to connect her inner world with the hearts of others. Lying down that night, she thought about the journey ahead. There would still be challenges, hunger, cold, uncertainty. But now she had a spark of hope, a path forward. She closed her eyes with a quiet smile, imagining the music she would create, the people she would touch, and the life she could build. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed full of promise, and she drifted off to sleep with a sense of peace she had never known, ready to face the next day with courage and song. As the days passed, her visits to the cafe became a small but important part of her routine. Each time she entered, she was greeted warmly by the staff and noticed by the regular patrons. They had come to expect her music, and it had become a quiet highlight in their otherwise ordinary days. The piano in the corner, once an object of distant admiration, now felt like an extension of herself. Every note she played carried a piece of her story, a story that had grown more visible with each performance. One afternoon, the cafe was busier than usual. A small group of people had gathered for a private event, yet the girl was still invited to play. She approached the piano with a mixture of excitement and nerves, her stomach fluttering in anticipation. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, and then she began to play. The melody flowed from her fingers, soft and tender at first, then swelling into something more passionate and intricate. Every person in the room turned to listen, their conversations fading into a quiet, attentive silence. The music carried emotions that words could not express. Patrons who had come in with busy minds and distracted hearts found themselves caught in the web of her melody. A man in a suit who had been frowning at his phone looked up, his eyes misting over as the notes touched something deep within him. A young woman sitting alone at a table gripped the edge of her chair, tears rolling down her cheeks. Each note seemed to resonate with memories, longings, and hopes that the listeners had tucked away. The girl was not merely playing, she was telling a story of life on the streets, of hunger, struggle, resilience, and dreams that refused to die. The waiter who had first invited her to play watched from a distance, a quiet pride in his eyes. He had witnessed her growth from a timid, hungry girl to someone who could command attention and touch hearts with nothing more than her music. He noticed the small gestures from the audience, the way they leaned forward, the subtle nods of appreciation, and the gentle sniffles of those moved by her playing. It was a rare and precious moment, and he understood that this was far beyond ordinary entertainment. As she continued, the girl began to lose herself in the music. Her fingers danced across the keys with grace and purpose, each note carefully chosen yet spontaneous in its flow. She could feel the energy in the room, the collective breath of the audience, and it fueled her performance. The melody swelled, carrying with it the highs and lows of her journey, the ache of hunger, the longing for a better life, and the beauty she found in fleeting moments of hope. It was a conversation without words, a bridge between her world and theirs, and it was profoundly moving. People in the cafe were visibly affected. Some wiped away tears, others held each other's hands, and a few sat completely still, unable to move as they absorbed every note. Her music seemed to unlock emotions that had been dormant, creating a shared experience of vulnerability and connection. The room, once filled with chatter and clinking dishes, had transformed into a space of contemplation and emotional resonance. Every person present was touched in a personal way, and yet they were all united in the profound beauty of the moment. When the final note lingered and faded, there was a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. The weight of what they had just witnessed hung in the air, a collective pause to honor the music and the story it carried. Then slowly applause began, soft at first, then growing louder and more heartfelt. People stood, some cheering, some still crying, and the room was filled with a warmth that went beyond mere appreciation. It was a recognition of something rare and genuine, a moment that would be remembered by everyone who had experienced it. The girl looked up, her own eyes wide with wonder and emotion. She had never imagined that her music could have such an impact, that the feelings she poured into each note could reach so many hearts at once. She felt a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and pride. For the first time, she understood the power of her gift, not just to entertain but to heal, to move, and to connect people in ways she had never known possible. After the applause subsided, the manager came over, her face shining with admiration. "You have a gift that touches the soul," she said softly. "People will remember this day, and they will talk about it for a long time. We are honored to have you here." The girl nodded, tears threatening to spill, and whispered a quiet thank you. She realized that her journey had taken a new turn. Her music was no longer a secret, a private solace. It had become a bridge to the hearts of others, a way to make her presence felt and valued. The rest of the day passed in a mixture of calm and excitement. Patrons continued to speak quietly about the performance, some approaching her to express their appreciation personally. She accepted their words with humility, a shy smile on her face, yet inside a fire of confidence and hope was growing. Each interaction reinforced the sense that she had finally found a place where her voice, her talent, and her existence mattered. She had moved from being invisible to being seen, from surviving to connecting, and the transformation felt profound. That evening, she returned to her usual corner under the bridge, but her perspective had changed. The city, which had once seemed harsh and unwelcoming, now felt like a place of possibilities. She unpacked her notebook and began to play, letting the melodies of the day continue to flow through her fingers. The music carried a new depth, informed not only by struggle but also by the warmth, kindness, and recognition she had received. It was a personal rehearsal, but also a continuation of the conversation she had begun in the cafe, a way to refine her story and her voice. As night fell, the stars appearing over the city, she felt a quiet contentment. She was still a street girl in many ways, but she carried with her something more powerful than hunger or hardship, a sense of purpose, a way to connect, and the knowledge that her talent could reach beyond her immediate struggles. The cafe had become a symbol, a reminder that courage and authenticity could open doors, and that the simplest acts of kindness could change the course of a life. She played until her fingers ached, letting each note convey emotions she could not put into words. The music became a dialogue with herself, a reflection of her past, present, and imagined future. She thought about the people who had listened, the tears and smiles she had witnessed, and the unspoken understanding that music had created between them. It was a powerful lesson, that even a single, genuine expression could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that seemed almost magical. Finally, she closed her notebook and sat quietly, taking in the night sounds of the city. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional footsteps of late-night wanderers, and the gentle rustling of leaves created a backdrop to her thoughts. She realized that life was still full of challenges, but she had begun to carve a path through them, a path illuminated by her music, her resilience, and the unexpected kindness of others. She felt gratitude not only for the food and shelter, but for the recognition that her existence, her talent, and her story mattered. That night, she drifted to sleep with a sense of peace she had never known. Her dreams were filled with melodies and possibilities, each note a promise of the life she could build, the people she could touch, and the hope she could carry forward. She had moved from being a girl defined by hunger and struggle to someone who had found her voice, who could command attention, and who could connect with the hearts of strangers. The transformation was not complete, and there would be more obstacles ahead, but she had discovered something invaluable: the power of her own story and the ability to share it through music. The next morning, she woke up with a quiet excitement that had been absent from her life for a long time. The streets were still cool and the city was slowly waking up. She felt a sense of purpose in her steps as she made her way to the cafe. The previous days had been a whirlwind of music, attention, and kindness, but today felt different. Today she knew that things were changing, that her life was beginning to move in a direction she had only dreamed about. When she entered the cafe, the manager greeted her with a warm smile, holding a small envelope in her hand. "We have something for you," she said gently. Curiosity and nervousness mixed in her chest as she accepted it. Inside was a note with an offer. The cafe would sponsor a series of music lessons for her, and there was also a small stipend to help her with daily necessities. Her eyes widened and she felt tears prick at the corners. The kindness, the belief in her potential was overwhelming. She had survived the streets through sheer determination, but this offer was a lifeline she had never imagined. She spent the morning practicing on the piano, her fingers flowing over the keys with growing confidence. Each note she played carried more strength, more assurance, as if the very act of performing was solidifying her place in the world. Customers came and went, many pausing to listen, their faces showing recognition and appreciation. The music had become a bridge, connecting her to the lives of people who had once seemed so distant. It was no longer just about survival. It was about expression, connection, and hope. Over the next few weeks, her life began to shift. She received lessons from a local music teacher, a patient and encouraging mentor who helped her refine her skills and build her confidence. She learned to read music more fluently, to explore different melodies, and to express emotions more deeply through her piano. Every lesson was a revelation, each one reinforcing the idea that she had a talent worth nurturing. The cafe continued to welcome her performances, and each time the audience grew, eager to hear her story told through music. People in the city began to notice her in ways they hadn't before. Some regulars shared her story with friends, others posted about her on social media, and soon more and more people came to see the street girl who could move hearts with a few notes on a piano. She was still humble, still shy in many ways, but there was a quiet pride in her demeanor, a subtle glow that came from being recognized for something beyond survival. The world was no longer an obstacle to her. It was a stage for her talent and her dreams, Her days became a balance of learning, performing, and connecting with people who believed in her. The hunger and cold that had once defined her life were no longer constant companions. There were still moments of struggle, of doubt and fear, but they were tempered by the encouragement and kindness she received. Every performance, every lesson, and every smile from someone in the audience reinforced the idea that she was more than her past, more than her circumstances. She was capable, talented, and deserving of a life filled with possibility. One afternoon, after a particularly moving performance, a local journalist approached her, asking to write a story about her journey. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted her private life exposed, but then she realized the power of sharing her story. Her experiences, her struggles, and her triumphs could inspire others who felt unseen or trapped in difficult circumstances. She agreed, and the article painted a picture of resilience, talent, and the transformative power of kindness. The story spread, and people began to offer support, from music supplies to invitations to perform at local events. The girl began to see the ripple effect of her music. What started as a way to survive and express herself had grown into something much larger, a way to touch the lives of others, to inspire hope, and to create a sense of community. She received letters and messages from people who had been moved by her performances, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. Each message reminded her that she was not alone and that her music had a reach beyond the cafe walls. Over time, her confidence grew. She started experimenting with different styles, incorporating emotions she had never dared to express before. She played for larger audiences, and the nervousness that had once gripped her at the piano gradually transformed into a calm assurance. She had learned to trust her instincts, to let the music flow from her heart, and to understand that her voice, both musical and personal, had power. The cafe became a second home, a place where she could practice, perform, and connect. The staff treated her like family, always encouraging, always supportive. The audience, once strangers, became familiar faces, their applause and smiles a testament to the impact she had on their lives. She had found a sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long, a community that saw her not as a street girl but as a musician, a storyteller, and a person of value. Evenings were often spent under the bridge where she had once slept, but these moments were different now. She would play quietly, experimenting with new melodies, reflecting on her journey and planning for the future. The city that had once been cold and indifferent now felt like a canvas, full of possibilities and opportunities. She realized that the struggles of her past had shaped her, but they no longer defined her. She was free to grow, to dream, and to create. One day, a local music event invited her to perform on a small stage in the park. She accepted, nervous but excited. When she played, her music carried through the open air, touching everyone who passed by. People stopped, listened, and some even joined in with applause and cheers. The performance was a culmination of her journey, from the streets to the piano in the cafe, from isolation to connection, from survival to purpose. She felt a profound sense of achievement, not for recognition, but for the realization that her music could move hearts and change lives. As weeks turned into months, her life continued to improve. She received more opportunities to perform, continued her lessons, and began to dream about a future filled with music. She still remembered the hunger and cold, the nights of uncertainty and fear, but those memories no longer weighed her down. Instead, they fueled her determination, reminding her of the strength she had found within herself and the kindness she had received from others. One evening, after a long day of lessons and performances, she returned to the cafe for a quiet moment at the piano. She sat down, her fingers poised above the keys, and played a melody that told the story of her journey, the struggle, the hope, the kindness, and the transformation. As she played, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Music had not only been her escape, but also her bridge to a new life. It had given her a voice, a purpose, and a path forward. The cafe was quiet, but she knew that her music had reached far beyond these walls. She thought of the people she had touched, the lives she had inspired, and the dreams she now dared to pursue. She had moved from hunger and survival to recognition and possibility, and the journey had only just begun. The girl who had once wandered the streets alone, hungry and unseen, was now a young woman with talent, courage, and a future full of promise. As she finished the melody, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The applause of the cafe and the cheers of the park seemed to echo in her mind, a reminder that she had come far and that she could go even further. She knew that life would still have its challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength, the talent, and the support to face them. She smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. Her journey had been difficult, but it had led her to a place of hope, connection, and possibility. And with that, she knew that the music would always guide her forward, one note at a time.